connecting the rivers and neighborhoods to each other and the rest of the city. That project secured over $20 million in funds for the first phase construction and serves as alternative transportation, economic development anchor, and stormwater management infrastructure, as well as healthy recreation. She also successfully implemented the Bronx Environmental Stewardship Training, the BEST program, a pioneering green-collar job training and placement system, seeding a community with a skilled workforce that has both a personal and economic stake in their urban environment. She's on numerous boards, such as the Wilderness Society, and she just most recently joined the board of the U.S. Green Building Council. So with that, Majora, we welcome you to the podium, and then we will have a discussion with the audience. So thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I actually have to tell you a little something before I start. I, believe it or not, have something in common with the Tea Party. No, I do not believe that our president was born outside of the United States of America, or that he's a communist, socialist, fascist, or maybe all three combined. None of that. What I believe that the Tea Party also believes is that we should have a smaller government. Now, how I believe that to be true and how I'd like to see that happen is by providing jobs and entrepreneurial opportunities for our most expensive citizens. Now, who, pray tell, are our most expensive citizens? They are folks that are returning from wars, our veterans. They're people that are generationally impoverished. They're those that go in and out of our criminal justice system. They're in each and every state of our union. However, they tend to be, many times, tend to be concentrated in many of our poorer communities. In the places in which, as Beth was talking about earlier, the kind of what makes a great, sustainable, livable community is when people have choices about where they can go and shop and work and all those kind of groovy things. And if we don't have that, that's where often, unfortunately, you find many of our most expensive citizens. And, I come from a place that's actually filled with a lot of them. It's the South Bronx in New York City. And I actually got interested doing this work when I moved back home after many years of being away, after running away from my neighborhood, in truth. I grew up at the time when literally the Bronx was burning. Years of financial disinvestment kind of paved the way for much of the polluting infrastructure that came in. We used to be a walk-to-work community. Then we became known as a part of the community, part of New York City, that our city and state saw fit to put all of its infrastructure in, from waste, and then later power, and then sewage, and these tiny little communities where we had to handle it. When I moved back home in the late 90s, we were posed with the city and state planning on putting a 5,200 ton per day waste facility in our community, which was about 40% of the city's municipal waste. We already handled about 40% of the city's commercial waste. So it didn't seem like much to them since we were handling so much, but it did seem like a lot to us. And so we worked really hard as a part of a citywide coalition, actually, to help the city encourage them to look at more sustainable solid waste management practices, which we were able to accomplish. But the interesting thing about all this was that I knew that in my heart of hearts that what I needed to be doing was not just working against something. And we had every right to be fighting, frankly. But we also knew that we needed to be fighting for something and being more proactive in terms of what we wanted to see there. And also the challenge was also changing the perceptions of what people thought poor communities and poor communities of color actually should be saddled with. And so one of the things that I wanted to do was it was really helped on by this dog. This is my dog Xena. She was a stray, found her when she was about 2 months old, all paws and a big head. But she was actually asked to be a part of this magazine called Bark Magazine, and I was just invited to go along because of because of some of the groovy things that she did. And one of the most amazing things she did, I do owe a portion of my career to this animal, was because as we were fighting against the waste facility, in our community, I kept getting these notices, actually, from a group that was providing different, actually small seed grants to do waterfront restoration on the Bronx River in our community. And I knew we had a river there. I saw it on subway maps, but I'd actually never seen it. And So this group, and actually Phil Rodbell, who's from the United States Forest Service, was actually a part of that. So he's here, and so it was nice to see him as well. But anyway, it was all about, you know, how do you get communities to think about looking at natural resources in their areas and doing something to restore them. And, you know, so I kept getting these notices to do these things, and I was just like, very well-meaning people, but, you know, you can't get to the river from where I live because of all the waste facilities and power plants and stuff that were all over our waterfront. But fortunately, this dog who grew from this little thing with a big head and paws into an 80-pound crazy thing, took me jogging into what I thought was just another illegal garbage dump in the neighborhood. And it turns out it was an illegal garbage dump in the neighborhood. But the cool thing about this dump was that it ended at the Bronx River. And I'd actually never seen it before. But I remember it was like 6:30 in the morning, and it was one of those absolutely magical days where the sky was just a perfect blue, not a cloud there. You know, the sunlight was rippling off the water, and it was like these little gold sparks coming out of it. And I was like, oh my God, this is my neighborhood. Okay. And so ran back home, wrote the little proposal, and we were able to transform that teeny little proposal into this beautiful park many years later. And it's the Hunts Point Riverside Park, the first waterfront park we had in our community in more than 60 years. And one of the few parks we had at all. But it's become, you know, since then, this enormously beautiful place for the community to get together, to really be a part of itself. And it is also a really, I think, a beautiful way for us to just remind folks that we weren't just the place where only garbage went, and that there were beautiful things that could happen, you know, in our community as well. And it really just has become an amazing place, and actually got married here as well, or there as well, with Zena, of course, as my flower girl. Yeah, she was sort of good, I suppose. But, you know, it really did become this tremendous place that the city, you know, saw the beauty of it, people saw itself reflected in it. But that was really just the beginning of what we saw as the future of our community, and how if we work to develop our community in an appropriately sustainable way, that it actually could help and support not just us as a community, but our entire city as well. Because we were looking then, you know, at the fact that this kind of thing, because is actually a climate adaptation strategy. You know, that there's really wonderful ways to continue on with it. But before I get into that, let me continue. But that was all about, you know, developing a beautiful space and a place for us to be a part of. And we realized that we could also be a part of something that's even bigger. So I actually was fortunate enough to have some great people in my life who pointed me in all sorts of beautiful directions. And one of them happened to work for our Regional Metropolitan Transportation Coordinating Council, and told me about this program from the Federal Highway Administration called CMAQ, or Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality Programs. And the whole idea was to figure out ways to sort of reduce congestion and improve air quality. That's it. And create projects to do that. And so we got the idea to do a greenway in the South Bronx, which would then, of course, connect us with the East Coast Greenway, which is part of Charles's project, because before that, it didn't go anywhere near the South Bronx. And we wanted to be a part of various communities, in particular the Greenway network that went from Maine to Miami. And so we wrote this proposal, or actually I wrote the proposal, it was kind of fun, and it was really hard, but it happened. And so we wrote the proposal, and turns out that we got it to the tune of $1.25 million to plan the feasibility study and to do the actual design. And all it was is a dedicated, you know, pedestrian and a bikeway that connects on water as well as, you know, in street as well. So like literally the idea was that when you walk outside of your house, the apartment building or whatever it was you lived in, that you would be on a greenway, that you would be able to access it just that way. And that was really exciting. So this is actually the street that leads down into the Hunts Point Riverside Park that I showed you a little bit earlier. And this is what it's going to look like as we start doing the construction. And we ended up getting about $25 million to start to do some of the first phase projects. Because we were a shovel-ready project, we actually got another $30 million to start doing some more work there. So, and this, I've never been happier to see construction in all of my life, but this is what's happening, or actually, well, it's snowing now, but this was what started happening last summer. Really excited about that. And so the whole idea about greenways, and just in particular, is that these things are, they provide climate adaptation strategies because they absorb stormwater. They actually, because it's this wonderful green thing, they provide opportunities to clean the air as well. And depending on how you do these things, they can provide the kind of really systematic changes that you need to promote some really awesome economic developments as well. So we're going to get started cracking on that pretty soon. But it was really important, being from a very poor community of color, to recognize that people, in our neighborhoods were, they definitely were happy to see the parks be built, to know that greenways were coming and all that really good stuff. But people were coming back to me and saying, this is all great, Majora, but what about jobs? We have a 25% unemployment rate in our community. It sort of hovers right there. And we realized that in order for for people to care as much as we knew that they could about the environment and how it worked in their self-interest, they were going to need to have both a personal as well as a financial stake in doing that. And so we started one of the country's very first green-collar job training and placement systems called BEST. And the idea was to train people in the fields of ecological restoration and then get them jobs in that. So we started first doing wetland restoration because we were working on the waterfront, so we had to literally grow many of the plants that were then planted on the waterfront to restore it. And then there was also urban forestry and green roofing and learning how to clean up contaminated lands, of which there are many, in our cities and actually rural areas around the country, and really training these people to do that type of work. And for us, it was also crucially important because so many of the folks that we worked with were folks that were generationally impoverished. They were people who had been cycling in and out of the criminal justice system. So we had to come up with ways to encourage them to make sure that they stayed in the program and give them the tools so that they can do that. So we had both the hard skills of the ecological training, but also the soft skills, learning how to be leaders in their own lives, like, understanding what it meant to really get up, be awake and present, at a job, being part of a team, knowing how to look busy when your boss was around, the kind of stuff that you all know how to do. But if you've not had a job, you wouldn't necessarily know that, now would you? So we had to teach folks how to do that kind of stuff. And, of course, and train them to do some great things as well. But we were really excited because in addition to all that, we were able to enjoy one of the highest placement rates for job training programs than anybody in the country. And I'm really excited. Yeah, you can clap for that. And this was, but now we realize that I'm really excited to know that there are groups that have even surpassed that rate, doing the same kind of practical applications that we've done. So that makes me incredibly happy to know that this kind of training does this kind of work. But it also does it, because we also know that that kind of horticultural work provides a very cost-effective therapy. One of the studies that moved me literally to do the work that I do right now was reading a study out of the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. And what they did there was do a really interesting study where they looked at Cabrini Green, which was a housing project, one of the most notorious in the country at the time. And the kids and the families that had access to a view of trees, in their area, had reported lower stress levels among adults, better test scores for kids, and higher self-esteem rates for young girls. And how were they able to test that in particular? Because the rate of teenage pregnancy in those areas were lower. And I was just like, trees can do that? But they do. And that's the whole idea of green infrastructure, especially when you couple it, with creating opportunities and job creations around people who really do need that work, that you're saving money in terms of the social costs of what those folks actually, provide, or actually we as taxpayers actually pay in terms of what they do. But they also provide the kind of environmental services that we truly need as well. So another thing that we were able to do was we actually started our own company, which is a smaller company, basically to sort of herald the beginning of the Greenway itself. And it may look like, my friend Amilka here is just sort of cutting, using a pole saw to, trim a tree. But And he is, but what he also did was he heard from folks in the neighborhood that because of that tree kind of blocked, because it was one of the few big trees in the neighborhood, it blocked the light of a street light across the street from it. And so because it was so dark there, that's where illegal activity was going on. But when he took a couple of pruned that tree in a way that allowed the light to come in, then guess what? Crime activity on that corner decreased. That is simply called crime prevention through environmental design, also green infrastructure. And much cheaper than a whole bunch of other things. And also another thing that this kind of stuff actually encourages is something that, the great, hero of urban planning, Jane Jacobs, calls eyes on the street. When you create the kind of streetscapes that allow people to be a part of it, then you are in and of itself creating a crime prevention technique as well. And so just making it safe for people to feel as though they can and should be outside playing and just being with one another. And another thing that we did it was kind of silly, but we realized that early on we didn't have a huge marketing budget to let people know that a park was actually coming to the neighborhood, because we just didn't. And so we did a great trailblazing technique, which is we painted a green line down the street, because that psychological thing, if people see a path, they'll generally tend to follow it. Well, we got a little street painter and basically did that. And people were flipping out because they had no idea what this line meant, but they followed it. And and that was that. So it was kind of cool. And also we did a clean up after your dog poop campaign as well, which was really pretty helpful. So another green infrastructure technique was one we borrowed directly from Western Europe, green roofing. Another really sustainable building technique where you literally plant a roof, for all sorts of reasons, but in particular for stormwater management. A green roof absorbs between 75 to 90% of the stormwater that hits it. It also, because it's a green layer, it cleans the air. Your roof lasts like at least 5 times longer, in many cases a lot longer than that. And they also provide green jobs. None of these can be outsourced anywhere, which is really super exciting. So this is the team that was working on our roof, in my house. And then we did another one, And so this is what we just did, little plugs and seedlings. But then, and this is my upstairs neighbor, who actually is the son of one of the first greenway stewards that went through our program, just came to survey everything. And this is what it looked like, I guess, a year after. And then there we go. This is what it looks like. And this was what the very first roof that we did, which was on our on Sustainable South Bronx's headquarters. And the idea there was to show you can do lots of different things on top of one particular roof. And even so, we did a little medicinal herb garden, even did some urban agriculture as well. And so I wouldn't allow anybody to eat anything except for the strawberries, because that would have been cruel and unusual punishment to not allow my staff to do that. So, but it was a really, really neat thing. But the thing that was also really cool was that we got all these visitors, like this hawk here that we named Fred. And it was just very fun. He'd come up and visit our roof, which is awesome. So this type of green infrastructure, we're not saying that, all the things that I showed you before, that they'll ever completely just obliterate the need for the type of hard gray infrastructure like these big old water treatment and sewage treatment plants here. But they can absolutely reduce it by reducing the amount of stormwater that has to be processed by these single-use, really ugly, smelly facilities that nobody wants to live near, but they end up having to be located, or no, they are located. They don't have to be located. That's just unfortunately where they do these things. Locating them, in areas, in particular poor communities. So seeing this stuff, and just in green roofs in particular, how cool would it be? Because we know that in particular any urban area, about 20% of the surface area is rooftops. Imagine if we were able to green roof all of that. Imagine the stormwater management benefits, and cost savings. Imagine the type of job creation that you could actually have, in terms of this type of opportunity for us. Imagine that literally thinking about the social costs of our most expensive citizens actually going down because they happen to be gainfully employed and not, bearing, the weight of so much of the cost that taxpayers now pay as a result of having them be the fact that there's, higher instances of domestic and alcohol, drug abuse, that their kids don't do as well as school. All those things is what makes those type of folks, the vets, the generationally impoverished, the folks that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated. You give them reasons to be a part of society by creating opportunities for them to participate fully in our economic lives that actually provide us with opportunities as well to make our cities more whole. Then you're creating some real amazing things there. So I started my own company, after I left my grassroots group back in 2008 to really help different types of stakeholders. So whether they're business leaders or municipalities and community groups, really see how by finding their self-interest, within the green economy and looking for others that they could actually work to create one that actually met a lot of people's needs. And so doing that has really helped me, get around the country in ways to see the type of truly amazing things that are going on. And really, it's what I like to think of as hometown security. And I've seen it happen all over the place where you've got local people who are solving big problems with very, very local solutions. And that's how we can create the kind of America that we want to be in as well. And so I want to make sure that this is not homeland security. Okay, just not, because that really is this like very insular kind of thing where it's almost sort of, you don't want to look outside and everything outside is just based on fear. This is about acknowledging the true beauty that is sitting right in front of you and expecting others to see it as well. So some of the folks are just amazing that I want to show you really who embody this kind of stuff. Andy Lipkiss formed an organization called Tree People when he was 15 years old. A little older than that now, not much. And so his big dream was to link people and trees, through technology in ways that actually brought them together to create more livable cities. And so, interestingly enough, in Los Angeles, or in California in general, they spend a huge amount of money, pumping. It goes to their municipal cost goes to energy, which basically about 20% of their energy cost is used to pump water into or out of that state. Huge amount of money. And just nationally, it's really important for us all to note, because between the landslides and all the awful stuff that goes on, and just the fact that it's so dry out there bringing water in, that there's, the second highest insurance cost in this country is actually flood insurance, which is only going to go up as we go, as the climate continues to change. And so Andy, actually, a few years ago, was presented with this really interesting problem that he saw. He's noticed that the Los Angeles County government was about to spend $2 billion with a B, dollars to fix the Los Angeles area schools. And he noticed that about 10% of that budget was specifically to add more asphalt and to do more air conditioning in the school system. And when he realized that, he just thought, he worked and his team worked really hard to get, the officials to understand that if by chance they took out, a good portion of the asphalt that was already there and added green space, then they could reduce the amount of energy that they needed in terms of air conditioning, because all of this green stuff naturally cools the air. But they also created better jobs for folks that were there. Kids did better in school because we know that there's kids who have access to greenery tend to do better in school that way as well, and save that county some money. So this was just a really wonderful way to see that as well. Another awesome person that I've seen around is a woman named Brenda Palms Barber. She's out in Chicago, and she was faced with this really interesting problem. She was hired to create a job readiness program for ex-offenders, and because it is definitely because of many different kinds of jobs out there, people are not all that interested in hiring them, especially when they hear, specifically they just got out of jail. So her job was to help them figure out how to bulk up their resume skills and really deal with being, where they were. But the other reason for her wanting to do this was because we know that we spend $60,000 a year, putting someone in jail for a year. That cost goes up to about $120 if it's actually a state prison. So, but let's just keep it on the low end, just so that you know. However, we also know that the national recidivism rate, that's for a person who goes to jail one time, the likelihood that they'll go back in again, 65%. So what Brenda did was she came up with this really, really interesting program where she used bees as a way to help support these folks, and created a skincare line out of the honey that they did. So she actually kind of re-engineered corporate social responsibility. Like, she didn't come up with a project that, you know, kind of like was a feel-goody kind of thing. She figured out, we need to come up with a project that's actually going to make money, to give people real jobs, you know, as they and so they can get the types of skills that they need, so they can actually become a viable person, you know, or that's considered a viable potential employee, you know, in this economy. And so these guys actually made the they first of all, they had to care for the bees themselves, they had to harvest the honey, they had to merchandise the product as well, and they also did in-store promotions at Whole Foods, and they have a huge mail order business as well. So this stuff is sold nationally right now, but it's truly a local business, because that's the way they always wanted to make it happen as well. So I think that the idea of doing that is a really important thing. And the reason why I wanted to showcase this project in particular is because, you know, we all know about a colony collapse disorder at this point, and the fact that doing these kind of very local pollination projects are really complements green infrastructure in ways, while it creates jobs as well. And since I'm in West Virginia, I could not talk about someone from West Virginia. Judy Bonds of Coal River Mountain Watch, born and raised in Whitesville, West Virginia, and she was a coal miner's daughter. 7 generations living in the same hollow, you know, of the mountains of her area. And she became an enormous advocate against mountaintop removal, which is that process where they literally chop off the top of a mountain, kind of pour some chemicals down, and do this really nasty process just for a few years' worth of coal. And only about 25, you know, men are required to actually do it, and it comes at some huge economic costs as well. So this would be any kind of mountain, you know, within the Appalachian Range. This was the former home of Judy Bonds and 7 generations of her family before it fell victim to mountaintop removal operations as well. And this is the kind of issue, this is the kind of stuff that came from their tap water, you know, after much of the work that was done on mountaintop removal. But Judy, in all her brilliance, and like a lot of her peers down there, realized that there was wind up in those hills, and that if you put wind generators up, wind turbines up there, then you could generate an enormous amount of power, create an enormous amount of jobs, and that supported the local economy. And that is what I'm just so proud that, you know, despite everything, this is what she left. When Judy and I met a few years ago, we swapped T-shirts. And, okay, and the back of my T-shirt that she gave me, it says, "Save the Endangered Hillbilly." So there you go. And so look, if a homegirl and a hillbilly can understand that this is how we need to move forward, then I think everybody on the planet can. And because we saw ourselves reflected in each other, knowing that the way out of the environmental crises that we were all experiencing, you know, the fact that, you know, even though we lived, I mean, look, the name of our town was Whitesville, West Virginia. I'm from the birthplace of hip-hop. We could not have been any more different, except for the fact that the kind of things that each one of our respective communities were sharing: high unemployment, lots of drug and alcohol abuse, you know, kids that really were just without hope, and that we were watching, you know, different environmental rages. I mean, if you've never, and I hope you don't ever have to, you know, stand like on, first of all, looking down at what, you know, a mountaintop that was removed looks like, or standing below what is a slurry pit that has all of the water and the residue from mountaintop removal there, and knowing that what could happen if by chance that thing burst. These are not the kind of things you want anyone to have to deal with, yet communities all over this country deal with it all the time. It is the exact opposite of what green infrastructure can do, just why we're fighting so hard about it. I'm just grateful that Judy left a business plan, because, you know, she died at the beginning of this year from lung cancer, a direct result of living where she was living. And I just hope that as we go forward, we're thinking more and more about how we can create the kind of world we really, truly want to live in, because we can. And so because I'm constantly always trying to think of ways, like how do you bring this stuff all together? Because I think that green infrastructure touches everything. We heard yesterday from the gentleman from Abu Dhabi how they use this really cool piece of equipment to just recycle old asphalt and then to reuse it right there on the spot. That's still green infrastructure. How we get or don't get our food, the quality of it, I think is also related to that, and in some really interesting ways as well. We all know about the fact that our food systems right now, it's one of the most unhealthy in the entire world. Highly subsidized, but produces the type of quality of product that adds considerably to our healthcare costs, creating the rates of diabetes and obesity. This is apparent, according to many different doctors that I've heard, this is going to be the first generation, because of those lifestyle-related illnesses, that'll be the first generation to die before its parents. And it's directly related to the type of food that we're eating. So creating a kind of food system that actually is healthy is something that's truly important for us. Creating a food system that is local is one of the ways that we can absolutely do that. We know that right now our system uses a huge amount in terms of transportation, or fossil fuels for transportation, but we also know that that stuff is actually turned into pesticides and fertilizers and put on our food as well. So creating a local food system that supports us in every way possible is a really important thing. And I want to be clear that what I'm talking about is not community gardens, which are really important, and they serve a tremendous role in terms of community building, but they don't really in terms of producing the kind of volume of produce that's needed or the kind of jobs that are needed to truly create a local economic engine anywhere. So we're actually working to create a national brand of urban-grown produce, and the goal is to really create a system in cities by using greenhouses to grow hydroponically, which means without soil, because in the same area, when you grow hydroponically, you can grow about 10 times as much food as you can traditional farming. And the idea is that in those in-city areas, where in those greenhouses, you can use that to augment the produce that's produced by regional farmers. Because right now, what we have in metropolitan areas is the fact that even though there is a demand for local food, much that's already grown that's already grown does not really meet the supply, doesn't meet the demand that's out there. So we have to really create these opportunities so that you can grow enough to meet at least some of that demand. And so creating these indoor growing facilities and using them to create one national brand and really work so that under this brand you've got the opportunities for folks for institutions and retailers to say, okay, I'll buy from one company, basically, even though the food is actually coming from regional as well as urban growers. And so creating that is a tremendous opportunity, and for us to develop these great ways to do that. So there'll be opportunities to eat food that you grow in your area, but also, to create real jobs that are absolutely needed, within that area. And these will be local jobs, and they can't really be outsourced, which is as we want them to be. And there'll also be opportunities for, to work with, excuse me, I just totally have a senior moment right there. Sorry about that. It just went away. But I remember, this is really important, because this is also because we're talking about local and really creating local solutions to the big problems of our day. We wanted to make sure that in our model, there's also going to be opportunities for local ownership. So there'll be employee stock ownership, opportunities for everybody in there, everybody who works for this as well. So, and I really see that, going forward, that I like to close my talks with this quote. This was a part of the letter from a Birmingham jail that Dr. King wrote, way back in the 1960s, and he was sitting in jail, and this note was to a collection of ministers, of white ministers, who, I think for fear of his life and of the lives of lots of people around that were in the civil rights movement, that it was just getting way too dangerous. And they told him, maybe now is not the time. Maybe, you should just stop a little bit. Maybe just hold off on this integration stuff. And the whole letter is amazing if you haven't read it. But this particular quote just means so much to me, considering where we are right now historically. And because we need to be super impatient about where we are, because here he was, and then a couple years later he was down in Memphis, Tennessee, and where was he the night before he died? You know, he was there fighting on behalf of black sanitation workers who had been told that they had to do the worst, most dangerous jobs for the least amount of money, and that was that. And they were impatient too. And so, and I think Dr. King was there because he knew that at the end, it wasn't just about racial equality, it was also about environmental equality as well as economic equality. I believe that green infrastructure actually has the capacity to provide all of those things in a country that desperately needs them all. By really linking all three of those together and using green infrastructure and the ability to create it as the glue that provides people the opportunities to make our communities, to help us deal with the impending climate change that we're experiencing, to help us with the social costs that we're already experiencing and have for a really long time, and to know that that we can really do something that allows us to really connect ourselves again with the natural world. Because even though human beings like to pretend that somehow or another we were meant to conquer it, we're really meant to live with it. And this is one of the beautiful ways to do it. You know, I believe that green infrastructure is a vehicle for all of those things to happen. And, you know, and I believe in the power of everyone in this room to make sure those things can happen. And I also believe that I can definitely help be a part of all of them. Thank you so very much.